Hi, this is Dr. Randy Bach. I do know my name, Randall S. Bach, MD. I can read it right there. Oops, over here. Today's October 16, 2021, and I am doing a special presentation of the weekly coronavirus conversation. We usually do Wednesdays at 7 p.m. Eastern, and right now it's 7 p.m. Eastern, but not Wednesday, Saturday. Um, I wanted to do a special edition for Kyrie Irving. Kyrie Irving and me, no, our lives didn't really intersect. I'm a Boston Celtics fan, and he was here for a couple years, I believe. There was a big trade. Danny Ainge went all out in or all out and got him because he was disgruntled um, in Cleveland. And so the trade was made. He wanted to have his own future, his own team. He wanted to be disassociated from LeBron James. So clearly, this is a guy who thinks on his own, thinks for himself, and things didn't work out too well in Boston. They were a good team for a bit. They got destroyed in, I guess, Kyrie's last series with on Boston with Milwaukee, and he was horrible. I mean, he just was so selfish and shooting the ball away with impossible shots. That being said, he is an incredibly talented basketball player. He is the single, I guess, most deft, agile dribbler of the ball I've ever seen. He stops and starts. He's very creative, and he has moves nobody's ever seen before till he comes up with them. He was Uncle Drew in the commercials, and that got turned into a movie. So he has a life. He's got a way of thinking. He's sort of known as, I guess, whimsical is a kind word. He dances to his own beat. He plots his own way. People call him selfish. I think there's something probably to that, but that doesn't necessarily kind of limit you in the world of NBA basketball players or maybe athletes in general. And so be it. He's probably not the maybe I don't know, maybe he's not the guy you'd want to have be your roommate forever. Who knows? But there are worse guys out there. I think he's articulate. He's comes up with his words. He speaks well, and clearly some of his I guess defining moments on the basketball court show that he has sort of a fearlessness and a creativity. He's been tied with this flat Earth movement. I don't know if he genuinely ever believed the Earth is flat currently. But I think he doesn't necessarily mind having his name associated with certain things that might put him in a slightly quirky way or light. And possibly he finds that is stimulating or interesting, or he genuinely believes. I have no idea. He managed to make his new own super team with Brooklyn, the Brooklyn Nets. Brooklyn is part of New York City. I'll come back to this. Since 1898. Before that, it was its own city, initially named Brooklyn from the Dutch. There's, I think, a town in the Netherlands with that name. I always thought it referred to a linn and a brook. Linn is an English term for it. Might have similarities in Dutch, because Dutch and English are similar, but a linn is a little like a minor, like a small rivulet waterfall within a brook. So I mean, there are brooklins. Maybe that's what the Dutch got. But anyway, Brooklyn was a thriving town, I think maybe the fifth largest in the country at the time, that it amalgamated with the Manhattan and Bronx portions of what was then New York City. Anyway, that's history, but it might also prove, again, probably come back to this as a possible solution to the Kyrie conundrum, as stated by the Wall Street Journal recently. So what is the problem here? Well, Kyrie, amongst many other players in the NBA, does not want to get vaccinated. I don't see any medical problem with this. He is not at risk from coronavirus, from the virus itself. And I'm fairly certain, I'm not positive, that he already had it last year, because he was out for COVID at one point. And his teammates, I believe, had it, and they party together and do a lot of events together off court. And so I think that the chances are very good that he had the illness already. So having had the illness, there's no reason to get a vaccine. This is across the board, has been always the case in medicine. Frankly, probably there's some, additional risk in getting a vaccine after illness. Um, uh, One of physicians I follow has mentioned this and gone into depth, significant amount of depth on the topic, and there are more side effects and more issues with people who have had the illness getting the vaccine at later point. So there's a couple different points in which Kyrie, maybe kind of the selfish, quirky, idiosyncratic kind of guy he is, or maybe the spiritual, interesting, religious leader that he is, or maybe the political activist that he is, or maybe the basketball player, or maybe the somebody we don't really necessarily need to categorize, doesn't want to get the vaccine just because he's in, a demographic that is not in danger for him. He's not going to put anybody else in danger. Statistics show during the course of this, 1.5 years and more and counting, that the United States has been coincident with COVID-19 or the Wuhan flu, SARS-2, coronavirus, redux, whatever you want to call it. Kyrie has not done any damage to anybody so far. And he hangs out with his teammates. They haven't either. There's been no, I guess, dominoes of deaths around Kyrie Irving. He has family. He has, I believe, a wife and kids, and nobody's on his end clamoring for him to do that. I if he were maybe working with the elderly in a nursing home, you might make an argument, maybe a little bit more strongly. But they have had the vaccine. The people at risk have had the vaccine. It's up to them and incumbent upon them to do what they need to do, and it's incumbent upon other people to do what they need to do. Now, a lot of people are making the argument that we're all in this together, and if you're not getting your vaccine, you're putting everybody else at risk because you can still get it and transmit it. I don't really buy into that for this illness. I think that the argument could be made, kind of the smallpox argument. George Washington, had his troops do the inoculum of smallpox, which was a pretty dangerous thing, and kind of on the new end of medical thought in the 18th century. But this is not smallpox. This is not Ebola. This is not HIV on wings. This is not one of those things. This is, really, the case fatality rate has gone down enormously over time, even from the initial. I mean, it went down was the initial phase when treatment and ways of dealing with it were not as fine tuned. And it's gone down steadily since then. And currently, in a state, not just a physical state, but, kind of in the geographic states and so forth, where people are vaccinated and where they've already had the illness, the case fatality rate is minimal. New York City is one of those places. And they didn't really have much of a bounce from Delta in the spring because they had a more severe initial round in March 2020, April, and so forth in the spring the year prior, and ditto throughout the entire Northeast. So, Delta wasn't much of a thing. A lot of these mandates have been put in, after the fact. It's kind of like preventing box cutters on the airlines when when the terrorists are up to shoe bombs and so forth, and then you start looking for the next thing. Just a lot of this is covering yesterday's news, and Mayor DiBlasio, I think I'm imagining it's the only city in the country that is enforcing this kind of vaccine passport issue to get into public spaces. Excuse me, to get into, I guess. I'm not sure how they qualify this, but to get into a building such as the Barclays Center, which is, I guess, is a privately owned but a sort of a public-ish space, Kyrie Irving would need to have a vaccine passport. He's not going to be able to produce one legally, and so they want to be out with him, be done with him. On the other hand, Mayor de Blasio is he was highly unpopular even amongst the Democrats, in the primary last year. I think he, kind of zipped out with 0% of anything. And he's on his way out in New York City. They have term limits there, and he's gone. Eric Adams is to his right. He's still a Democrat. Or Curtis Sliwa as a Republican. I think he's got a low chance of getting, but let's presume that the favorite Eric Adams gets into office. Kyrie might have a different situation, a few months from now with Eric Adams in office. I don't know if Kyrie has been in discussion with it. He might have, some inside cards, playing his hand the way he wants to, and be able to, get back into the Barclays Center. The New York Nets, on their side, have kind of had enough of this, and he, as it stands, he would not. Kyrie Irving would not be able to play and practice in Brooklyn. I think there might be some accommodation about his practicing, but they wouldn't be able to play their home games and games against the Knicks. So 43 games of the year he wouldn't be able to play. So they said, basta, enough. We're not going to have you on the team in the meanwhile till you get a vaccination card so you can play our home games. They are paying him for half the season. They're only withholding half his pay, which is a lot of money. It's about I don't know, $16 million he's getting, and $16 million they're withholding. And he would be able to play in every other city. So he could play the 76ers, he could play the Celtics, he can play the Sacramento Kings, et cetera, all around on their, the Brooklyn Nets away games. And the odd thing is, the Nets are actually the favorite to win the NBA title this year because they have Kevin Durant and, James Harden on the team, amongst others. And, that generally wins in the NBA. So Kyrie Irving has one championship under his belt, but I'm sure all of this machinations, maneuverings he's done, to get this Kevin Durant in the circuit in Brooklyn was with the idea of getting another one. So I know he's passionate about this, and not personally, but I imagine he is, and I'm sure he doesn't want to sacrifice that. So you have to look at. I'm not going to equate him with Mohandas Gandhi or Nelson Mandela or George Washington or Patrick Henry or anything like that. But he's doing what he sees best in his own conscience. And not only that, I think he's doing what's right on a medical basis. This is, again, not smallpox, not Ebola. He's not presenting any huge danger to anybody else. He hasn't already. The NBA in general has, I think, hundreds of players have had COVID already. How many of them have gotten ill? Zero from the COVID. Now, I don't know how many have had vaccines and how many have gotten ill from vaccines. You could look at the NFL as well. You don't really know yet. The vaccine's a new thing. There's not the same data out for it as there is for, the various influenza vaccinations or, Haemophilus, tetanus shots and so forth, which have been around for decades. And this is a brand new one. And not only that, it's a brand new modality of one if you're taking the Moderna and the Pfizer versions. There have been cut downs and cutbacks on administration of this vaccine to young people, young men in particular. I think Iceland has stopped doing it for people under 16. Israel cut back the dosages and the dosage frequency for young people and men in particular. And even The Economist pointed out that you have more risk as a 20 to 25-year-old male from the vaccine than you do from the virus because of myocarditis principally, but there may be other side effects down the road, who knows. So on a medical basis, why would you, Kyrie Irving sells his physical skills and myocarditis, that is one muscle he's using, his heart. He needs to have his heart maximally working, and if there are muscle issues or cardiac issues and so forth, I think that would hugely inhibit a basketball player. Many basketball players have had to stop because of such issues for other reasons. One of his teammates, frankly, LaMarcus Aldridge, I think, stepped down because of cardiac issues at one point, and another in his back, so forth. But so these happen. Jeff Green, another his teammate last year, had cardiac issues. I think these guys know that the heart is the engine that keeps them going. Obviously, they need their brains and their agility and all that other stuff, and they need muscles in general and so forth. But heart is kind of crucial if you're an athlete. I don't think he wants to screw around with that. And to get into the stadium this season and yet potentially sacrifice future seasons, I don't think is a good even financial risk for him, even if he sacrifices half his salary currently. He could be traded to another team and play throughout. Jonathan Isaacs is on the Orlando Magic, and I highly recommend you go listen to his videos. I think he has a Twitter feed. Really interesting guy, articulate, heartfelt, and moving. He does not want to get the vaccine. Nobody's presented him a really good medical reason why he should. Everyone's like doing it. Do it for the team. Do it now because we want you to. And I'm going to get to that. So I want to just present a few points of view out there. And you know, I just find it interesting and amazing. This is the case. So the one that kind of spurred my doing the special Kyrie Irving edition tonight is this one here. This is from the New York Post. This is by a guy, Joel Zinberg, who's an MD and a JD, and here he is. Um, Serious guy. He's a writer as well. So he's a doctor, a lawyer, and a senior fellow with the Competitive Enterprise Institute. So I think he's probably right of center politically. And I found it interesting. The CEI.org, their about is CEI makes the case for freedom every day. I don't know if you can see that over here, and they ascribe to Julian Simon's ideals. And Julian Simon, I think, this is a totally separate topic, but one of the most interesting guys. He did the bet with Paul Ehrlich, which somewhat gets misinterpreted these days, but this is one of the most interesting things ever. There'll be probably another topic, and it's not necessarily coronavirus, but I recommend you look into it. He bet Paul Ehrlich that the price of commodities would go down. And he won the bet across the board. Paul Ehrlich got to pick the commodities. I think the bet was in the 80s. Here it is, I guess, described. Here we go. So I'm not making this up. The 5 metals featured in famous 1980 bet with environmentalist Paul Ehrlich, based on Simon's positive theory about natural resources. Simon bet Ehrlich the price of the metals would decline over a decade, even if the world's population grew. And so this is an interesting thing. Julian Simon won the bet because, as he puts it, the world's problem is not too many people, but lack of political and economic freedom. So this is the Competitive Enterprise Institute itself, which seems to hire and take care of Joel Zinberg. And Kyrie Irving, I think, is exhibiting the political freedom aspect and potentially the economic freedom as well. And he's certainly providing ideas in a sense, or stimulating ideas and conversation about this. So I would give, Kyrie Irving, again, not necessarily my favorite player on earth because he left the Celtics, and I think he's, has some loyalty issues and so forth. But, he's an interesting guy, and you got to respect him because, he's getting misquoted now, and people are throwing almost everything at him. I'm going to show some of the stuff from the left and from the right. I'm going to start with the right. I think Joel Zinberg's somewhat on the right because he's on this Competitive Enterprise Institute fellowship. And so he goes on, Kyrie Irving's a great basketball player, blah, blah, blah. Why is Irving doing this? It's going to cost him money. The team has decided to exclude him from practices. Frankly, this is right after the city made a dispensation for Irving to be able to get into practices. And so then the team, was not happy with that because they're not happy in general about Irving. So why is Irving doing this? So this is Joel Zinberg, MD, JD. Most adults who refuse vaccination cite concerns about vaccine safety. Yet it's unclear why Irving is refusing, whether it's safety or effectiveness. I don't think this is any of Joel Zinberg's business. His title of his article here is "Listen to a Doc." The vaccines are safe and highly effective. Well, Dr. Zinberg, maybe listen to me. I'm also a doctor. I think that's irrelevant. I think that has nothing to do with this case at all. I think Dr. Zinberg's overstepping here about intruding on Kyrie Irving's personal freedom to make this decision. And so here he goes on, whether Irving has legitimate doubts as a political crusader or simply a nut. I don't know why he has to bring this in. His refusal to be vaccinated is inconsistent with the vast evidence showing vaccines are extremely safe and effective. Well, that's somewhat true, but it's compared to what? There's a joke, 2 data scientists walk down the street. One says, "Hi, how are you?" The other says, "Compared to what?" You need to know compared to what. And right here is compared to what. This is from Reuters, from the CDC, mind you. This is June 2020. Heart inflammation in young men higher than expected after Pfizer, Moderna, Okay, so what's going on with this? We clearly have an imbalance there. Dr. Shimabukuro, deputy director, the overwhelming majority of the cases have occurred within a week of vaccination, heart inflammation, blah, blah, blah. So I'm not making this stuff up. And whether Mr. Irving knows this or not is irrelevant. Even if he knows nothing about this, doesn't make him a nut. for not wanting to be vaccinated when this vaccine has not been out long enough to really warrant, overstating its safety. I think it's a very reasonable thing to do for elderly people. Being cautious about this for young people does not make one anti-vax. There are loads of vaccines out there. I doubt you have had all of them. You probably haven't had the one for yellow fever or hepatitis or whatnot. Just because they're there doesn't mean you should be having them. And he mentions here Johnson Johnson, rare form of blood clot, so forth. Whatever is motivating Irving, his decision is bad for the Nets and a bad example to a public that looks up to its sports stars. But we also look up to its doctors. We also look up to our lawyers. We look up to people like Dr. Zinberg, who has both. I don't think this is helpful for his argument that Kyrie Irving has obligations as a sports star beyond keeping himself as a sports star. If Mr. Irving took this doctor's advice under advisement, is Dr. Zinberg willing to underwrite Kyrie Irving's potential side effects? If he does get myocarditis and he's left out of basketball forever and loses not just $34 million or $60 million this year, but in the next 5 years, maybe $150 million worth and so forth, is Dr. Zinberg going to pay the difference? I doubt that. So I think it's kind of like cavalier. He's pointing out that Ted Williams went to war, Pat Tillman went to war. This is not the same. We are not going to war. We're not in combat. The enemy is not the Nazis here, it's in the Ted Williams example. And it's not the Taliban for Pat Tillman's example, or ISIS, or anything like that. And he goes on, as NBA legend Kareem Abdul-Jabbar told reporters, players who refuse vaccination aren't behaving like good teammates or good citizens. Well, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, if I'm not mistaken, is in his 70s. And he was a wonderful basketball player, an interesting guy, thoughtful, apparently, and he reads and so forth. But I don't think he has any standing here. He's at the older end of life. He's not playing anymore, and I think it's really cavalier, not the Cleveland Cavaliers, to say this about Mr. Irving. It's up to his own teammates to make that decision. Nearly all the NBA's players are vaccinated. Irving is free to make a different decision for himself. Well, thank you very much, Dr. Zinberg. Certainly, collecting nearly half of his multi-million-dollar salary will ease the sting of sacrificing payments for missed games in New York. But Irving should think long and hard about why he is doing this and consider the effect his decision will have on others. Well, I would venture to say he's already done that. I think he's a thoughtful guy. He may not be Phi Beta Kappa, like Joel Zinberg. He was only 1 year at Duke, so I think that's probably out of his possibility. But I think it's really what's the word, patronizing and deprecating for Dr. Zinberg to say this about Irving. Like I said, I don't know if they're all vaccinated, or if some of them are, all of them, fine. But they don't all have to be. Many of them have had the illness. And everybody who's had the illness, I'd like Dr. Zinberg to state why he thinks somebody who's vaccinated needs to get, why somebody who has been exposed and has full immunity needs to get the vaccine. I think that is an absurdity. And this is really just lockstep. This is not about individual freedom. I would venture to say that Julian Simon would find this on the low end of human ingenuity. So that the whole purpose of Julian Simon is to realize that men can make their own destiny, and they can figure things out in real time. And that's why the values of chromium, copper, nickel, tin, and so forth, tungsten, went down, because we started to use fiberglass and I don't know, different types of materials, and we got away from the ones that were in short supply. I'm going to maybe spend a little bit of time just kind of going over some more of the Kyrie story to give you a little bit of background, just as the way he was looked at only a few months ago. This is April 2021. So this is from the undefeated.com, which is an offshoot of ESPN. This is kind of their very woke racial consciousness. I think, I'm not sure if all the writers are black or not, but it's a very kind of, I guess they call it I forget how they categorize this, but they call it the the epicenter of basically social justice, race, and so forth, intersecting with sports. So Kyrie Irving's conversion to Islam shows his commitment to life beyond basketball. The star's social justice and humanitarianism efforts are part of his unique lifestyle. So he's kind of lauded here because he juggled Ramadan and the NBA. I'm not saying that's easy. And so um, he was kneeling before tip-off apparently as a prayer, not necessarily as a Colin Kaepernick. He was Black Fathers Matter hat atop his head, which I frankly think that is really useful. And he's got his own things going. Now, is this a religious thing? It might be. I respect Mr. Irving for not even bringing it up. I don't think anybody needs to know his reason. And I think that this is really, a lot of people kind of stepping on his feet to get what they want for their own purposes. And again, I think this has much more to do with New York City mayor doing something that doesn't happen anywhere else. And no place else do you have to show papers to get into buildings. I mean, the Nazis did that for a lot of other people, and this is being called kind of a vaccine apartheid because blacks in New York City and elsewhere have the lowest overall vaccination rate of any given I guess race or ethnicity, however you want to call it. And so Mayor Bill de Blasio has a simple message for Nets Kyrie Irving: get vaccinated. Well, how about we give Mayor Bill de Blasio a simple message back? Like, no. I mean, you're leaving office. You've done something that's draconian, useless, and pointless. I could show you the worldometer for New York City. There's nothing going on there in terms of COVID. Why are you doing this? I think this is really just a power thing. I would appeal to him: get vaccinated. Your fans want to see you. Well, Bill, all you have to do is get rid of your silly mandate, and then Kyrie can do what he wants to do, or he can try a different city. He left Boston, he left Cleveland, go to Boston, left Boston, go to New York City, Brooklyn, and he can leave Brooklyn to go, to the Sacramento Kings. I'm sure there are probably at least 15, 20 teams that would be happy to have him at his price and so forth. The Nets just have to let him go, and then he can play all of his games except the maybe 2 or 4 or 8 games, depending which team he winds up in New York City and or Brooklyn, which is New York City. There are teams that are now 100% vaccinated. That's a great example of everyone else. Not necessarily. Again, these are young men with really, across the NBA, nobody's had any problems themselves from coronavirus. And there's no evidence they've transmitted to everybody. This is really just something they do. A lot of people here are doing because they can. And here's a kind of, I don't know if I can spend too much more time on this. There's a voice from the left. In a sense, Brian Phillips, I don't really know his politics hugely, but I was kind of getting it from the sense from reading this article. I recommend you read this as well. This is from The Ringer. And he's covered in New York in the Wall Street Journal as well. And there's a lot of sighing. He's an interesting writer. He's very colorful writing, but he just wants him to do it because he doesn't want Kyrie to be kind of a spokesperson or a message or an icon for the quote unquote anti-vaxxers, like the anti-birthers. There's no such real thing as an anti-vaxxer. There's no anti-birth. There were no birthers. These are epithets that people who don't like you use to marginalize you. I guess the term was birthers for people who didn't believe, Obama's, birth certificate was Hawaiian and so forth. Until he produced it, I mean, you were reasonable and rational to be curious about it. He has a very interesting past. I'm not going to get into it. But, I think that's water under the bridge at this point. You're not an anti-vaxxer if you're cautious about something that you don't necessarily need because you're a young man. I think, again, if this were Ebola, it'd be a different story. If this were HIV, aerosolized HIV, yeah, fine, get it. Anthrax, fine. HIV, fine. We don't have a vaccine for HIV. If they were there, I think people would think about it. And they might, if you're at risk, you should take it. Anyway, I'm probably not going to spend too much time on this except to recommend you read it, with the concept that people here are not so much concerned about Kyrie Irving for Kyrie Irving, nor are they concerned that Kyrie Irving is going to affect a lot of people. They're concerned about how it looks and whether it's giving, oxygen for people whose political views are not your own. And I guess here, maybe there's a one sentence paragraph, and in that sense, Irving's not quite anti-vaccine protest seems like just about the most unhelpful message a public figure could put into the world at this moment. It's a discourse bomb. It will generate a frenzy of conversation, but because Irving's own statements about his intentions are so muddled, actually, I don't think they're muddled. I just don't think he's brought them up that much. You can read them if you want. They are quoted here. Um, he said, nobody's going to hijack my voice. Nobody's going to take the power away from me that I have for speaking on things. Don't believe that I'm retiring. Don't believe that I'm going to give up this game for a vaccine mandate or staying unvaccinated. Don't believe any of that stuff, man. Be aware of what's being said before I even get a chance to be on the podium and speak for myself. So he doesn't want, he doesn't want Brian Phillips speaking for him. He doesn't want Joel Zinberg speaking for him. He doesn't want Mayor DiBlasio speaking for him. He's going to say it for himself. And in the meanwhile, he doesn't have to. And again, this is not smallpox. It's not HIV. Aerosolized HIV. This is not a major health issue for himself or those around him, nor for the nursing homes or anything like that. So he's well within his rights, and every other basketball player who's having this issue is not in the big news anymore, are currently, because their cities haven't done what DiBlasio just did, and what DiBlasio did can be undone by Eric Adams or Curtis Sliwa, either one. I think that's pretty much my major point. You let me know if you have things you'd like to add about this. I wish Kyrie Irving the best. I think he's a thoughtful guy, and I think he's made some, put himself out there. It's at some personal risk because he brought Kevin Durant and James Harden there, basically, and they would like to win a championship. I think Mayor de Blasio just has to get out of the way. So my last suggestion, getting back to Brooklyn, is secede. Become your own city again. Make your own mandates. You probably don't have to do that because, January 20th or whenever the new mayor comes in, he'll probably undo Mayor de Blasio's mandate. But be that as it may, if that doesn't work out, make your own city again, make Brooklyn Brooklyn again, and we'll go from there. So thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if you did or didn't. Give me some questions for the next time, and I'd love to hear.